Around 5,000 years ago, in the Sumerian city of Uruk, in what is now southern Iraq, a temple official pressed a reed stylus into a small tablet of wet clay. He was not writing a prayer. He was not recording a legend or a law or the name of a king. He was writing down beer. Specifically, he was keeping track of who had received rations of barley and beer from the temple warehouse and who still owed what. Thousands of these tablets survive, and they are, as far as we can tell, the oldest writing on Earth, which leads to one of the strangest facts in all of human history. Writing was not invented for poetry or scripture or love letters. It was invented for accounting. The single oldest name ever recorded, a man called Kushim, was not a king or a priest or a warrior. He was, almost certainly, an accountant. His tablet records 29,000 measures of barley over 37 months and ends with what amounts to a signature on a receipt. Money, in other words, is older than the written word. We learn to write down debts before we learn to write down our own stories. And yet nobody ever sat down and invented it. There is no patent, no inventor, no eureka moment. So how did humans actually invent money? The answer takes us through temple warehouses in Mesopotamia. A king so wealthy his name became a figure of speech, Chinese paper that one of history's most famous travelers genuinely struggled to believe was real, and a quiet television announcement in 1971 that transformed every coin and every banknote on this planet into something that is, technically speaking, pure belief. But to understand where money came from, you first have to understand the story you have probably already been told about it. Because that story, as tidy and as logical as it sounds, appears to be almost completely wrong. We will get there. The story begins not with coins, but with grain. When the first true cities rose in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago, they created a problem no band of humans had ever faced before. Tens of thousands of strangers, living side by side, all depending on food that came in once or twice a year at harvest, and then had to be stored, guarded, and handed out for months. The great temples became the warehouses, and the warehouses needed bookkeeping. So the Sumerians settled on a standard unit, the shekel. And here is the detail most people miss. A shekel was not a coin. It would not be a coin for thousands of years. It was a weight, roughly 8 grams, originally tied to a fixed measure of barley. Wages were reckoned in it, debts were reckoned in it, fines were reckoned in it. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest surviving legal codes in the world, sets out compensation and interest in silver by weight, centuries before anything resembling a coin existed anywhere. Which means money did not begin as an object you carry. It began as a unit you count, a way of measuring who owes what to whom, scratched into clay and stored in a temple. Money was born as a ledger. For roughly 25 centuries, that was enough. And then, around 600 BC, in the small and absurdly fortunate kingdom of Lydia, in what is now Western Turkey, somebody finally turned money into a thing. The rivers of Lydia carried electrum, a natural pale gold alloy of gold and silver, and the Lydian kings began striking small, standardized lumps of it with an official stamp, a roaring lion. That stamp changed everything. It was a promise, pressed into metal. The king himself vouches for the weight and the purity of this piece, so you no longer have to weigh it, test it, or trust the stranger handing it to you. You only have to trust the stamp. The last king of Lydia, Croesus, refined the idea into coins of pure gold and pure silver, and grew so spectacularly wealthy in the process that 26 centuries later, we still say, rich as Croesus. Coins spread with astonishing speed, and the reason was not shopping, it was soldiers. A coin, it turns out, is the perfect technology for running a state. Kings and city-states could mint coins, pay their armies with them, and then demand those same coins back from the population as taxes, which, at a stroke, forced every farmer and fisherman in the kingdom to want coins. Within 3 centuries of Lydia's first lion stamps, coinage had ignited across the Greek world, Persia, India, and China, almost simultaneously, as if the idea had simply been waiting for someone to go first. And this is where we have to stop and deal with the story you have probably heard, the famous one. It goes like this. Before money, there was barter. The baker traded bread for the butcher's meat, and everything was fine until the butcher didn't want bread and the whole clumsy system ground to a halt, so humans invented money to fix it. Adam Smith told a version of that story in 1776 in the very book that founded modern economics, and it has been repeated in textbooks, in classrooms, and in documentaries ever since. It is logical. It is intuitive. It is elegant. And according to the people who actually study ancient and traditional societies, it almost certainly never happened. Anthropologists spent more than a century searching on every inhabited continent for a single society that actually ran its daily life on barter, neighbors swapping goods on the spot. The way the textbooks describe, the anthropologist Caroline Humphrey put the verdict about as bluntly as an academic can. No example of a barter economy, pure and simple, has ever been described, not one. What fieldworkers found instead, in village after village, was something far more human: favors, obligation, memory. You needed grain, and your neighbor simply gave you grain, and everyone quietly understood that you now owed them, and that the debt would come back around as help with a roof, a share of a hunt, a daughter's dowry, someday in some form. Small communities ran on remembered debt, on trust with a running tally, which means the barter problem money supposedly solved never really existed in the first place. Money did not replace barter. Money is the tally itself, made visible, made countable, and, crucially, made portable enough to work on someone who does not know you at all, and never will. That is the real invention hiding inside every coin, not a medium of exchange. A way to carry trust between strangers. Once you see money that way, the next great leap makes perfect sense, because the object itself was never the point, and the Chinese proved it first. By around the year 1000, under the Song dynasty, the merchants of Sichuan province had a very practical problem. Their local coinage was iron, and iron is heavy. Buying anything substantial meant hauling strings of coins by the cartload. So merchants began leaving the coins in guarded deposit houses and trading the paper receipts instead. And in 1024, the Song government took the idea over and issued the jiaozi, the world's first official paper money. Think about what that required. A piece of paper has no value at all. Every person accepting it was accepting a pure promise, backed by nothing but the state's word and everyone else's willingness to do the same. When Marco Polo reached China more than 2 centuries later, he watched the successors of that system operating across Kublai Khan's empire, paper made from the bark of mulberry trees, stamped with vermilion seals, spending exactly like gold. He devoted an entire chapter to it, writing that the Khan seemed to have mastered the secret of the alchemists. Europeans reading his account simply refused to believe it. Money made of paper sounded like either a traveler's tall tale or outright sorcery. It took Europe another 400 years to catch up. First through Italian banking houses like the Medici, who moved fortunes across the continent using nothing but ledgers and letters, and finally through state banknotes, each one anchored by a reassuring promise printed right on the paper. This note can be exchanged for gold. That golden anchor felt permanent. It lasted, in one form or another, into living memory. And then, on the evening of August the 15th, 1971, the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, appeared on television, interrupting the most popular show in America, and announced, in the middle of a longer speech about the economy, that the dollar would no longer be convertible into gold. The gold window was closed. It sounded like a technicality, and most people watching shrugged and went to bed. But walk the logic through, and that quiet Sunday broadcast may be the single strangest moment in the entire 5,000-year story. The world's currencies were anchored to the dollar, and the dollar was anchored to gold, and the anchor had just been cut. From that evening on, for the first time in history, essentially every unit of money on planet Earth was backed by nothing physical at all. No barley, no silver, no gold. Only the same ancient ingredient the temple clerks of Uruk were working with all along: belief and the accounting of it. Today, the transformation is nearly complete. More than 90% of the world's money has no physical form whatsoever. It is not printed, minted, or stored in any vault. It exists as numbers in databases, moving between banks as electronic entries, appearing and vanishing as loans are made and repaid. Your salary, your savings, the price of your home. Almost all of it is, quite literally, entries in a ledger, which means that after 5,000 years, money has quietly come full circle. A clerk in Uruk pressing beer debts into wet clay, and a banking computer updating balances in a database are doing precisely the same thing, recording who owes what to whom in a tally the whole community agrees to trust. The coins and the banknotes, the gold and the paper, all the physical stuff we think of as money, turns out to have been a 5,000-year detour. Impressive, glittering, occasionally beautiful, but temporary. So how did humans invent money? Slowly, accidentally, and without ever quite realizing what they were building. Sumerian accountants needed to track the temple's barley. Lydian kings needed soldiers paid and taxes collected. Sichuan merchants were simply tired of carrying iron. Each step solved a small, practical, almost boring problem, and no one involved ever set out to create the force that would go on to build cities, fund empires, launch voyages, and quietly organize nearly every waking hour of modern human life. And perhaps that is the real answer. Money was never truly an invention, not the way the wheel or the light bulb were inventions. It is a story. The longest-running collaborative story our species has ever told, a shared agreement that this token, this paper, this number on a screen can stand in for trust between strangers. Every morning, 8 billion people wake up and keep agreeing to it, and so it keeps being true. The clay tablets of Uruk have long since hardened into museum pieces, but the thing they recorded never stopped. We are all still writing on that same ledger.